Welcome to Pretty Lies and Alibis. Let's seek the truth and travel the long road to justice together. What you know, Alibiers? Welcome to another episode of Pretty Lies and Alibis. I'm Gigi. Good to have you here. I hope everybody had a great Thanksgiving. I just took a few days off to hang out with my family, but back to the grind. Mark your calendars. December 7th, I'm going to have a big live with Amy Williams. She was a deliberating juror in the Alec Murdaugh trial here in South Carolina, and also the author of The Long Road to Justice, which just came out. Highly recommend you guys grab a copy and read it. Going to have several true crime content creators on the show with me, including Joel from Surviving the Survivor, as well as Lauren and Dr. John from Hidden True Crime. Hoping to get some more guests, and I'll be announcing those as I confirm people can make it. So today we're going to be doing a what we know so far on the case of Veronica Butler and Jillian Kelley. I did a couple of episodes on this case when it first hit the news. Veronica and Jillian were both murdered in what we're seeing far too often around here, which is a custody dispute. Veronica was the mother of the 6 and 8-year-old children. Jillian, a supervisor for this supervised visitation, killed for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. The two women were traveling to Oklahoma to pick up Veronica's children for a court-ordered visitation. Their bodies were found on April 14th, buried in a freezer in a cow pasture. They both had been brutally murdered, stabbed to death. Let's do a who's who. So we know Veronica was the mother of the two kids at the center of the custody dispute, and Jillian was with Veronica as a supervisor, also a mother herself and wife to a pastor. Wrangler Rickman is the father of Veronica's kids and the son of Grandma Tifany. He was in Oklahoma City in rehab at the time of the murders and is not a suspect. What do we know about these suspects? Well, they were members of an anti-government group that had religious affiliations. It's called God's Misfits. It's a fringe underground group. People say that members of this group claim to be sovereign citizens. Well, what is a sovereign citizen? It's a concept where ultimate political power resides with the population. They delegate authority to governing bodies to act in their best interests. Tifany Adams, she is the grandmother, the mother of Wrangler. She has admitted to her role in the murders. She had previously served as a county Republican Party chairperson. Friends say she was unhinged. She would post bizarre stuff on social media. And after she was arrested, in the bail paperwork, investigators say she admitted that she knew the way the judge from the custody dispute walked home from work every day. She owns thousands of acres of land, seems to have a good bit of money. Her son Wrangler complained on social media that his mother was trying to steal his children and that his mother had threatened him if he didn't sign papers to try and get full custody. Tifany's boyfriend, Tad Cullum, he has a farming business and leased some of the land where the women's bodies were found. He leased that for cow grazing. He's said to be the one that stabbed and killed Jillian and also the one who drove the bodies to the burial site. Now, Brian Enton has had boots on the ground since this case broke and said that Tad is still trying to make business deals for now and the future from jail. He has a lot of money, owns a lot of land. After he was arrested, police found a go bag that had money, body armor, a rifle, and ammunition inside. The next two suspects, Cole and Cora Twombly. Cora's teenage daughter has provided a lot of valuable information in this investigation. And the last is Paul Grice. He also has admitted to his roles in the murder and burial of the bodies. He cut his hand pretty bad in the attack. He also has these extreme beliefs. And in July of last year, he went to the county clerk's office and paid $104 to file this political manifesto. And in that filing, he was renouncing his U.S. citizenship. His views are said to be based on conspiracy theories, legal hypothesis, and religious delusion. He also sent copies of this document by certified mail to the U.S. Secretary of State. He said he was a sovereign citizen, and that made him exempt from U.S. law. I think Paul's finding out that wasn't the case. Part of the document read, "I am a creation of nature and nature's God. A man found alive and living, commonly known by my family, friends, and neighbors as Paul Grice, and so here I will stand. One place the God's Misfits group would meet was an old abandoned school. This is next to Cora and Cole Twombly's house. They also would meet there sometimes. They would meet at the home of another couple whose names are Barrett and Lacey Cook. Brian Enton reported on News Nation shortly after the women's bodies were found. He talked to some locals who said they would sometimes see between 12 and 15 cars outside this school. There was an article in the Kansas Reflector. It was an opinion piece by Mac McCoy. It gave a lot of insight into the beliefs of this group. And in the article, Mac says, quote, "The group may have embraced reckless and vengeful violence as an extension of their apocalyptic religious beliefs that children are property and no government or other human institution can interfere in parental authority." This custody battle started back in February of 2019. Tifany Adams' son Wrangler had custody of the kids. Now, one key event that is more current occurred in March of this year. On March 18th and the 20th, Veronica filed motions to have extended unsupervised visitation with her kids. That hearing was scheduled for April 17th. Veronica's attorney told investigators it was likely Veronica would be successful in getting unsupervised visits with her kids at that hearing, and to me, there's your motive. Now, part of the custody battle records were recorded conversations where Wrangler discussed death threats from his mother, Tifany, and her boyfriend, Cullum. There were times where Tifany would deny her son visitation with his children, even though he had legal custody. Law enforcement had been called in the past when she would not allow her son to take his kids. And reportedly, one of the officers told her son, Wrangler, the children were better off with her. Now, Veronica had that court-ordered supervised visitation with her children every Saturday. For the supervised visits, the grandmother, Tifany, preferred a woman named Cheryl to supervise. And if Cheryl was the supervisor, Tifany had to pay her. Veronica had 3 approved individuals, and if it was one of her supervisors, Veronica had to pay them. But on the day in question, Grandma Tifany said that her preferred supervisor, Cheryl, wasn't available. So Veronica asked Jillian. Veronica's plans the day she was murdered was to take her daughter to a birthday party. When investigators interviewed that supervisor, Cheryl, that Tifany preferred, she said that Tifany told her to take the next couple of weeks off. The reason, Tifany wanted to have Veronica's 3 approved supervisors accompany visitation. And in turn, Tifany wanted to question the kids about how the supervisors were. After getting the cell phone data, investigators found that Tifany searched for gun shops on her cell phone. That led them to a purchase on March 23rd where she bought 5 stun guns. On March 29th, the day before the murders, Cora's daughter, who was 16 by the way, told investigators that Cora and her husband Cole told her they would not be home in the morning when she woke up because they were going on a mission. On the 28th or 29th, a day or two before the murders, Jamie Beasley, the owner of that land Tad was leasing, said that Tad asked if he could cut down a tree, remove a stump, buy some concrete, and do work where the concrete pile was below a dam on the property. He said Tad had left his skid steer on his property, and when he woke up around midnight on the 30th, it was gone. The day of the murders, Paul, Tad, and Tifany had phone conversations that morning. Tifany said she called Veronica at 9 a.m. to confirm the custody exchange and said Veronica told her she couldn't make it. Phone records show there was a call between the 2 women. Now, at the time the call was made, Veronica was already going to pick up Jillian to make that drive to meet Tifany for the exchange. Tifany said she was at home at the time Veronica and Jillian went missing and said she picked the kids up around noon from that couple who held meetings in their home whose names were Barrett and Lacey Cook. Now, Veronica told family she was going to pick the kids up at 10 a.m. at Four Corners. Very isolated area. It's at Highway 95 and US 64 West in Texas County, Oklahoma. Phone records show Veronica and Jillian arrived to Four Corners at 9:40 a.m. Their phones were actively sending signals until 9:42 a.m. when they stopped. And Tifany was the last person Veronica had contact with on her phone. Cora's teenage daughter told investigators that her mother, Cora, and Cora's husband, Cole, blocked the road to divert the women to where Tifany, Tad, and Paul were waiting to kill them. Later, when Veronica did not show up with her daughter to the party, her family started searching for her. Two of her family members, Melissa and Joey, found Veronica's car and called law enforcement at 12:09 p.m. Around the car, there was evidence of severe injury. Blood was found on the road as well as the edge of the road. Veronica's glasses were found in the road just south of the vehicle near a broken hammer. A pistol magazine was found in Jillian's purse, but there was no gun. After the murders, Tad and Paul were together at Paul's home. As for the burner phones of the suspects on the day of the murder, all three phones were pinged in the area where Veronica's car was, which was also the last known location of the two women. Between 10:16 and 10:35 a.m., two of the burner phones were located on the property that Tad rented, also where the bodies would be found later. They were pinged below a dam, which is in a pasture where later fresh dirt was located by investigators. Cora's 16-year-old daughter told investigators that her mom and stepdad returned home around noon. She knew they had left and returned in a blue flatbed pickup truck. The daughter was told to clean the pickup truck, and when she asked what happened, she was told things didn't go as planned, but they would not have to worry about Veronica again. When the daughter asked why Jillian had to die, Cora told her that Jillian had supported Veronica and she wasn't innocent. The daughter asked if the bodies were put in a well, and her mom replied something like that. The burial location was about 8.5 miles away from where Veronica's car was found. Investigators believe the 34-minute time frame between Veronica and Jillian's last cell phone pings and the time the two burner phones pinged on the property fits within that window of when the suspects would have been driving to the property. When investigators found the property, they found that concrete had been moved from a location near the residence on the property to about 150 to 200 yards below the dam. Investigators saw a hole had been dug and filled in with hay on top. They found the women's bodies in a freezer. That was about a 10-foot deep hole. With the bodies, they found a stun gun, Paul's clothing, and the knife that was used in the murders. Paul's clothing had both his and Veronica's DNA on it. They also found Tad's clothing inside the burial site with his and Jillian's DNA on it. At his home, they found accessories to that knife. Tad's girlfriend, Tifany, bought the pants that he wore during the murders. They did get search warrants for cell phones, and what were some of the searches found on Tifany's phone? Taser pain level, gun shops, prepaid cell phone, how to get someone out of their house. This is consistent with Cora's daughter's statements to investigators that there was a prior attempt to kill Veronica back in February of this year. They had planned to lure Veronica out of her home, and the plan was to throw an anvil through Butler's windshield while driving, making it look like an accident because anvils regularly fell off work vehicles. These are really heavy pieces of metal that blacksmiths commonly use in their work. On March 31st, the day after the murders, Tad told Mr. Beasley, who was the owner of that property he was leasing, that people were looking at him as far as the disappearance of Veronica and Jillian. He said he didn't want the police to cause any problems for the man and said the skid steer tracks on his property without a skid steer looked bad. Beasley told Tad if anyone asked, he would say Tad had done tree and dirt work for him. When police were interviewing the teenage daughter of Cora in Texas, Cora and her husband Cole showed up to get access to the kids. When police told them they couldn't, Cora became verbally aggressive with the investigators, and Cole got out of the car armed with a handgun and a holster on his belt. There was a search warrant executed on Tad's property that he leased April 13th. That lasted into the 14th. This is when they found the bodies. Well, after they were arrested, Tifany had additional charges of 2 counts of child neglect for exposing the children to illegal activity. She got this charge by making the kids carry ratchet straps around a farming supply store a week before the murders. The straps were found wrapped around the freezer where Veronica and Jillian's remains were found. In the bail hearing shortly after their arrest, the women's families were understandably emotional and very vocal in court, with one family member having to be restrained. Grice waived his right to a preliminary hearing and a speedy trial. He's not due back in court until February 19th of next year. There is a preliminary hearing December 17th at 9 a.m. I will be live streaming that if it is streaming online. And court filings show that Paul and Cora are now state's witnesses and will testify against the other 3. I would venture a guess they probably struck a deal to take death off the table in exchange for their testimony, but we don't know for sure. But that preliminary will be a joint hearing for Tifany, Cole, and Tad. Let's look at the autopsies for these women. Just a trigger warning. This is very graphic, unpleasant stuff, and I'm going to water it down as best I can. Veronica stabbed 30 times, and she had possible stun gun marks to the back of her lower neck and her upper back. Injuries on her hand indicate she likely grabbed the knife at least twice. 4 of her wounds would have been fatal, and the defense wounds on Veronica show she fought hard. For her head and neck, there was 1 blunt force injury to the crown of the head, 4 incised wounds, including 1 deep wound to the top and back of the head with full thickness scalp defects, 1 deep incised wound to the lower central forehead with underlying frontal skull fracture, 1 superficial incised wound to the right side of the cheek with a defect to the skin, 1 stab wound to the left upper neck with defects to the left jugular vein, the oral floor, and upper neck muscles with large amounts of bleeding, including intraesophageal and intragastric hemorrhage. This wound was around 3.9 inches deep. There was 1 deep incised wound to the upper neck with a defect to the left neck muscles and the thyroid. 2 stab wounds to the lower right side and back of the neck with defects to the right lower neck muscles, right internal and external jugular veins. There were defects to the right aspect of the C5 vertebrae and the spinal nerve. The C5 and C6 spinal cord and disc, the C6 vertebral body and upper esophagus, with a lot of associated bleeding, including intraesophageal and intragastric bleeding. For the torso, 2 angled stab wounds and 2 incised wounds around the clavicle, 2 angled stab wounds to the top of the right shoulder with defects to the subcutaneous adipose tissue. That's just the fat between our skin and our muscles. 1 stab wound to the upper right back with defects in the subcutaneous adipose tissue. For extremities, 6 defensive type incisional wounds to the right 2nd through 5th fingers with defects to the underlying muscles and soft tissue with partial severing of the right middle finger joint. 1 superficial defensive type wound to the left forearm skin. 1 defensive wound to the left wrist and also left palm with defects to underlying muscles and soft tissue. 2 defensive wounds to the tips of the middle and pinky fingers, and there were defects all the way down to the bone. 1 stab wound to the left front thigh with defects to the fat, and 1 superficial incised wound to the left middle of the thigh skin. For Jillian, she also had possible stun gun marks to the back of the neck and the back of the left shoulder. As far as her injuries, there were a cluster of 9 sharp force injuries. 7 were stab wounds and 2 were incised wounds, which are more like cuts. There were injuries to the back of the scalp and neck skin, soft tissue and muscles, the tongue base, the left internal jugular vein, back of the skull, cervical spine, and the spinal cord with multiple fractured cervical vertebrae and multiple spinal cord injuries, including a possible complete transection of the upper cervical spinal cord at its junction with the brainstem, one stab wound to the right cheek with defects to muscles, soft tissue, the right zygomatic arch, which is a curved bony bridge that runs alongside the skull below the eye socket that connects our temporal bone to the upper jaw. One incised wound to the left temple with defects in the soft tissue, muscles, and to the skull. One incised wound to the left jaw with defects to skin and fat. For the left shoulder, there was one superficial incised wound and one stab wound to the back of the left shoulder with defects into the muscle and soft tissue. On her hands, there was one defensive wound to the left index finger and the right thumb with defects to muscles, tendon, bone, and the joints. Just a horrific crime. And we see so many of these cases where it's done for children or in the name of children. And really what you're doing is giving these kids a huge burden to carry for the rest of their lives. When they get older, they'll find out why. And it's just a burden that these adults put on these kids, all because they were selfish and, safe to say, really crazy. That's it for this episode. That's a tough one. All right, guys. Hope you have a good rest of your afternoon. We will see you soon.